afternoon. I'm in Tampa, Florida for a few days. I was recently requested from a friend to help with a new project that he's doing in estimating what would be required for producing the kinds of reports that he wants to produce. In looking at what he had asked me to do, I went back to some material that I had written in my book, Balancing Act, and found there a number of things that I think might be useful to put into a number of episodes. So I think we'll begin by talking about that. Let me start by saying, though, to introduce this series of episodes, that these computing processes are actually quite predictable. They're very deterministic. It is math. I was taught by a number of mentors over a number of years. When I would go to them with a certain problem, sometimes they would ask, have you done the math? Because doing math isn't something we necessarily like to do. It's something that requires more of us in thinking fast and thinking slow, as one of the books has talked about. But we have to force ourselves to do that. Doing the math is important because math allows us to predict outcomes, to see what will happen, because computing, the cost of the time required for computing instructions, the capacity of machines, the number of records required, all of those kinds of things, they might not be known at a complete accurate level, but they can be pretty accurate enough to give us a good sense of when we run into problems that we should have known we were going to run into problems. That's what these series of episodes is going to be about, how to prevent running into those problems by doing the math. So to start those kinds of processes often requires simply gathering some basic statistics, and often looking at existing systems is the best place to start. Looking at the volumes involved in existing systems, looking at the reports that come out of existing systems. There's a great accumulation of thoughts have gone into existing reporting processes and in business event capture systems. So leveraging what you can from that to begin with is always a good idea. So I would suggest that you start thinking about those kinds of things. What we'll go through in this process is starting with those statistic gathering, but we'll also have to think about what kinds of reports or analytical process we want to perform. Yes, business event-based systems give us the ultimate flexibility. We could produce anything, and yet it still requires that we write systems to produce outputs. So even though we have greater flexibility by moving towards a metric engine, in the short run, we aren't going to have the compute capacity to deal with all of the data that's available for us. So we're still going to be living with some constraints around the compute capacity relative to the data we have and the outputs we want to receive. So we're going to have to think a bit about what those outputting reports are. We can certainly, if we build based upon business event-based insight principles, have a more flexible system, but not an unlimitedly flexible system. So the steps will be to talk about gathering the kinds of reports that are needed, looking at the transaction data that goes into those reports, looking at the reference data needed for those reports, calculating whether the report, what it will take to produce the report, all from the transactional event with no summarization, and seeing if that can be done in a reasonable amount of compute capacity. If not, then we have to start talking about posting processes, or at least summarization aggregation processes at a minimum. And we'll start going through that cycle multiple times until we end up with a system that we estimate will be able to produce the outputs that we're looking for at the cost we can incur in the time frames that we need. So we'll go through these set of episodes about estimation and see if this isn't helpful in considering how to improve our metric engines.